He told her she'd never survive without him. That she was too soft, too emotional, too afraid of the world to ever stand on her own. And for a long time, sitting alone in that empty apartment, she almost believed him. But 7 years later, when he showed up at her door with a rental application in hand, desperate for a place to live, she realized something. Sometimes the universe doesn't give you closure. It gives you keys. And the man who once held your heart now has to ask permission to have a roof over his head. What do you do when the person who destroyed you needs you to save them? When karma doesn't come with thunder, but with a lease agreement and a signature line? Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. They say love is a journey, but for Elara Voss, it felt more like a promise written in gold. She met Dorian Kellen when she was 31, at a mutual friend's rooftop party in downtown Chicago. He was 34, confident in the way men are when they've never had to rebuild themselves, with a laugh that filled rooms and a presence that made people lean in when he spoke. He worked in corporate finance, always talking about the next merger, the next big account, the next promotion that would finally put him where he deserved to be. Elara was different. She was a junior architect at a small firm, working late nights on housing projects that would never make headlines but might give someone a better place to call home. She had this quiet intensity about her, the kind of person who listened more than she spoke, who noticed the small things like how someone took their coffee or the way light moved through a room. When Dorian approached her that evening, holding 2 glasses of wine and asking if she wanted to escape the noise, she felt something shift inside her chest. Hope. The dangerous kind. The kind that makes you believe maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. They talked for hours that night, long after the party ended, sitting on the roof's edge with their legs dangling over the side, watching the city lights blink like fallen stars. He told her about growing up in Boston, about his father's expectations and his mother's silence, about how he promised himself he'd build a life where he'd never feel small again. She told him about her childhood in a cramped apartment in South Side, about her mother working 3 jobs to keep them afloat, about designing her first house on graph paper when she was 12 because she wanted to give her mom a home with windows that actually opened. He looked at her when she spoke, really looked at her, like her words were the most important thing in the world. And for the first time in years, Elara felt seen. 2 months later, they were inseparable. He'd show up at her office with takeout when she worked late, leave notes tucked in her coat pockets that said things like, "The world's lucky to have you," and "You make everything better." He made her feel safe in a way she'd never felt before, like she could finally stop bracing for the other shoe to drop. She introduced him to her mother, who squeezed her hand under the table and whispered that he had kind eyes. Elara wanted desperately to believe that. 7 years. That's how long they built a life together. 7 years of shared morning routines, of arguing about whose turn it was to buy groceries, of lazy Sundays spent reading in comfortable silence. 7 years of inside jokes and midnight conversations and plans scribbled on napkins about the house they'd buy someday, the one with the big backyard and the reading nook by the window. Everyone said they were perfect, unbreakable. He used to joke, "You and me, Elle, even when we're old and gray." And she'd laugh, her heart full, and ask, "Promise?" He'd answer without hesitation, "Swear." But promises fade when ego gets louder than love. When ambition becomes more important than the person sleeping next to you. When you start measuring your worth by titles instead of the people who believed in you before you had any. It started with a promotion. Senior Vice President. Corner office. New responsibilities. Suddenly, Dorian was working late every night, coming home after 10 with his tie loosened and his eyes distant. Dinners went cold on the table. Conversations became transactional. "How was your day?" turned into, "Did you pay the electric bill?" She told herself it was just a phase, that once he settled into the new role, things would go back to normal. But normal never came. Instead, the distance grew. He stopped asking about her projects, stopped noticing when she got her hair cut, stopped reaching for her hand when they walked down the street. At first she believed his excuses because love teaches you to trust the lies that feel familiar. Working late, babe. Big presentation tomorrow. Just exhausted. Don't take it personally. Weeks turned into months, and Elara found herself lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering when she became so easy to ignore. Wondering if she'd done something wrong, if she wasn't interesting enough, ambitious enough, if she'd somehow failed to keep his attention. The worst part wasn't the loneliness. It was the silence. The way he could sit 3 feet away from her on the couch and feel like he was on another planet. Then came the morning everything shattered. It was a Tuesday, ordinary in every way except for what it would become. Elara needed to grab something from Dorian's car before heading to work. When she opened the passenger door, she saw it. A coffee cup in the cup holder, still half full, stained with lipstick that wasn't hers. A deep burgundy shade she'd never worn in her life. Her hands started shaking before her brain could catch up. She stood there in the parking garage, car door open, staring at that cup like it was a bomb about to detonate. It's just a coworker, she told herself. He probably gave someone a ride. But her heart already knew the truth. Hearts always know before minds are willing to admit. She went back upstairs, set her bag down, and did something she'd never done before. She picked up his phone from the nightstand. Her fingers trembled as she entered his passcode, the one he'd given her years ago, the one he never thought to change. The messages loaded slowly, each second stretching into eternity. And there it was. A thread with a name she didn't recognize. Lyra. Good morning, beautiful face, blowing a kiss, can't wait to see you again. Sent at 6:42 that morning, while Elara was in the shower getting ready for work. While she was still believing in them. She scrolled up. Weeks of messages. Months, maybe. Flirtations that turned into plans. Plans that turned into late-night meetings. Meetings that turned into something she couldn't bear to name. They say heartbreak doesn't make a sound, but that night, when Dorian came home and found her sitting on the edge of their bed with his phone in her lap, Elara swore she could hear her world collapsing. The silence before the storm is always the loudest. He stood in the doorway, tie loose, eyes tired, and froze when he saw her face. She didn't cry, didn't yell. She just asked quietly, like she was inquiring about the weather, "Who is she, Dorian?" He tried to smile, that easy charm he always relied on to smooth over problems. "What are you talking about?" She held up the phone, screen facing him. "Don't lie to me. I saw the messages." The smile died. A long pause stretched between them, filled with every word they'd never said, every moment they'd let slip away. Then he said the name. Lyra. Just one word, but it carried the weight of everything that came next. He added, trying to make it sound less terrible than it was, "I didn't mean for it to happen." 7 years of shared life, of building something together brick by brick, collapsed into that single sentence. She whispered, her voice breaking for the first time. 7 years, Dorian. And you didn't mean for it to happen. Sometimes betrayal doesn't come with shouting or thrown objects or dramatic confrontations. Sometimes it's quiet, like a door closing softly on every dream you ever had. Sometimes it's just two people sitting in a room they once called home, realizing they're already strangers. He tried to explain, to justify, to make her understand. He said things had gotten stale between them. That she was always tired from work, always stressed about projects and deadlines. That Lyra was different, exciting, that she understood the pressure he was under in ways Elara couldn't. He was making it sound like Elara's dedication, her ambition, the very things he'd claimed to admire, were somehow her fault. Like she'd driven him away by daring to have her own dreams. She listened to every word, feeling herself grow colder with each excuse, each deflection. When he finished, she said something she'd never said before. "Pack your things." He looked genuinely surprised, like he'd expected her to beg him to stay, to fight for him. "Elle, come on. We can work through this." She shook her head slowly. "No, we can't. Because I don't want to." He packed that night in silence, moving through their apartment like a ghost, taking only what was his. Before he left, he paused at the door and said, with what might have been genuine concern or might have been guilt disguised as care, "You'll be fine. You're strong." Then the door clicked shut, and just like that, the world forgot her. Or at least, that's how it felt. Days became nights. Nights became weeks. Elara moved through her life like she was underwater, everything muffled and distant. She went to work, sat through meetings, responded to emails, but none of it felt real. She'd come home to an apartment that was suddenly too big and too small at the same time, too full of memories and too empty of the future she'd imagined. Friends texted, "You okay? Want to talk? You'll find someone better." She couldn't even answer most of them. What was she supposed to say? That she felt like someone had reached into her chest and rearranged all her organs? That every morning she woke up forgetting for just a moment that he was gone, and then remembering hurt all over again? That she'd started sleeping on the couch because the bed felt haunted? She almost sold the apartment once. Called a realtor, scheduled a walkthrough, stood in the living room watching a stranger evaluate her life in square footage and market comparables. But something inside her whispered, "Not yet. Your story isn't over." So she canceled the appointment and decided to stay. Not because she was ready to heal, but because running away felt like letting him win. One morning, about 3 months after he left, Elara woke before sunrise. She couldn't sleep anyway, so she got up, made coffee, and stood at the window watching the city blush with first light. The buildings looked different at that hour, softer somehow, like they were waking up alongside her. She caught her reflection in the glass, this woman she barely recognized anymore, hollowed out and tired and so angry. Not just at Dorian. At herself. For making him the center of her universe. For losing pieces of herself trying to be whatever he needed. For believing that being chosen by him meant she had value. She said out loud to that reflection, her voice steady for the first time in months, "If I can rebuild my life, I'll do it from scratch." And from that moment, something shifted. The pain didn't disappear. Pain doesn't work that way. But it changed shape, transformed from something that paralyzed her into something that could fuel her. Heartbreak became homework. She started researching real estate investment, staying up late reading articles about property management, rental markets, renovation costs. She worked her architecture job during the day and picked up freelance drafting work at night. She was exhausted all the time, surviving on coffee and stubborn determination, but she kept going. Because sometimes the best revenge is becoming everything they said you couldn't be. Sometimes it's proving to yourself that you were never as small as they made you feel. There were failures. So many failures. Banks rejected her loan applications. Real estate agents dismissed her when she said how much she could afford. She spent nights crying over spreadsheets that wouldn't balance, over properties she bid on and lost, over the crushing weight of trying to build something from nothing. But she kept going. She cut every unnecessary expense, lived on rice and beans, wore the same 3 outfits on rotation because new clothes didn't matter. Only the goal mattered. 14 months after Dorian left, Elara held the keys to her first property. It was a duplex in a neighborhood that was politely described as up and coming, and more accurately described as falling apart but cheap. Peeling paint, leaky pipes, windows that didn't quite close. But it was hers. She'd signed her name on the deed, and that name mattered more than any ring ever could have. She threw herself into renovations, learning to tile bathrooms from YouTube videos, to fix electrical outlets, to negotiate with contractors who tried to overcharge her because they thought she didn't know better. The duplex took 6 months to renovate. She did most of the work herself, coming home from her regular job covered in drywall dust and paint stains, muscles aching, hands blistered, but somehow more alive than she'd felt in years. When she finally rented out the top unit and moved into the bottom one, she sat on her newly installed porch and cried. Not from sadness this time. From relief. From pride. From the bone-deep knowledge that she'd done something Dorian said she never could. While Dorian posted photos on social media of weekend getaways with Lyra, of fancy dinners and beach vacations, Elara signed contracts. While he was chasing the appearance of happiness, she was building actual security. Brick by brick, key by key. She bought a second property 18 months later. Then a third. By year 5, she owned 6 rental units scattered across 3 neighborhoods, all fully leased, all generating steady income. She'd hired a property manager to handle day-to-day operations and launched her own consulting firm, helping other women invest in real estate. She moved out of the duplex into a renovated brownstone she'd purchased and restored herself, with exposed brick walls and floor-to-ceiling windows and a kitchen where sunlight pooled in the mornings like liquid gold. She had savings. She had investments. She had peace. The kind of peace that comes from knowing you don't need anyone to complete you because you were never incomplete to begin with. Dorian became a memory. Not a painful one anymore, just a fact of her history, like an old address or a childhood pet. She didn't think about him often. Until the day everything came full circle. It was a Tuesday morning, ordinary in every way except for what it would become. Elara was in her office reviewing contractor bids when her assistant, Maya, walked in with a stack of rental applications for a newly renovated 2-bedroom unit in Lincoln Park. One of her nicest properties, recently updated with stainless appliances and hardwood floors. Maya set the stack on her desk and tapped one application near the top. This one looks solid on paper. Good credit history up until about 2 years ago, then some late payments. Current employment. References check out. Might need first and last plus security though. Elara nodded absently, reaching for the file. Then she saw the name typed across the top in Standard Times New Roman font. Dorian Kellen. The world tilted. She read it again, certain she was hallucinating. But there it was. His name. His social security number. His employment information showing a series of jobs she didn't recognize, none lasting more than 18 months. She sat back in her chair, the application trembling slightly in her hands. Maya was still talking about occupancy dates and lease terms, but Elara couldn't hear her. All she could hear was the sound of her own heartbeat, loud and insistent, reminding her she was still here, still standing, still whole. She told Maya she'd review the applications and get back to her by end of day. When the office door closed, Elara sat in silence, staring at that name. She should have felt vindicated. She should have felt triumphant. Instead, she just felt curious. What had happened to him in 7 years? Where was Lyra? Why was he applying to rent one of her properties? Did he even know they were hers? She did what anyone would do. She looked him up online. His LinkedIn showed a career trajectory that had peaked around year 2 after the promotion, then plateaued. He'd left the finance firm 3 years ago. The company had downsized during an economic slump, and according to a brief news article she found, Dorian's entire department had been eliminated. Since then, he'd bounced between roles, senior positions with impressive titles but shorter and shorter tenures. His Facebook was mostly private, but his profile picture showed him alone. No Lyra. She searched for Lyra separately and found her account. Recently married, but not to Dorian. The wedding photos were from 14 months ago. She'd married someone else, someone younger with a startup company and a verified Instagram account. Elara closed her laptop and sat in the quiet of her office, processing. She thought about the girl she'd been 7 years ago, the one who believed she needed Dorian to feel complete. And she thought about the woman she was now, the one who built an empire because someone told her she couldn't. What would she do with this information? What should she do? Part of her wanted to reject the application immediately, to write "denied" in red ink and mail it back. Part of her wanted to never respond at all, to let him wonder, to leave him in the same kind of limbo he'd left her in. But there was another part, quieter but stronger, that was simply curious. What would happen if she said yes? She approved the application the next day. Standard terms. First and last month's rent. Security deposit. Credit check noted. Move-in date scheduled for the 15th. She didn't mention who she was in her email response. Just signed it, Voss Estates Management. A week later, Elara stood in the newly renovated apartment on Oakwood Avenue, doing a final walkthrough before the afternoon showing. Everything was perfect. Fresh paint in a soft gray. Polished hardwood floors that gleamed in the afternoon light. Wide windows overlooking a tree-lined street. Stainless steel appliances that still had the protective film on them. Everything in order. Everything under her control. Then the buzzer rang. She walked to the door, her heels clicking against the floor, each step deliberate and measured. She took a breath, smoothed her blazer, and opened the door. Time hesitated. There he was. Dorian Kellen. Older. Thinner. His hair starting to gray at the temples, his face more lined than she remembered. And beside him, the woman from the lipstick-stained coffee cup, Lyra, wearing a diamond ring and an expression that measured the space like she was evaluating a purchase. Neither of them had seen her yet. They were looking past her, into the apartment, already imagining themselves there. Then Dorian's eyes landed on her face. She watched the recognition hit him in stages. Confusion first. Then shock. Then something that looked almost like fear. His voice came out strangled, barely above a whisper. Elara! She smiled, calm and professional, like she was greeting any other potential tenant. Mr. and Mrs. Kellen. Welcome. I'm Elara Voss, owner of Voss Estates. Please, come in. She stepped aside, gesturing for them to enter. Dorian seemed frozen in the doorway, his mouth opening and closing like he couldn't find words. Lyra looked between them, sensing something but not understanding what. Finally, Dorian managed. I didn't realize you owned this place. I had no idea. Elara's smile didn't waver. Why would you? Shall we begin the tour? She walked them through the apartment with the polished professionalism of someone who'd done this hundreds of times. Pointed out the updated kitchen, the spa-quality bathroom, the closet space, the balcony with its view of the park. Her voice was steady, warm, even, describing amenities and lease terms. Dorian barely spoke. He kept staring at her like she was a ghost, like he was trying to reconcile the woman in front of him with the one he'd left crying 7 years ago. Lyra loved everything. This is perfect, she kept saying, running her hands along the marble counters, admiring the fixtures. Don't you think, honey? Dorian just nodded, because what else could he do? They couldn't afford to say no. Elara had seen their financial information. She knew they were stretched thin, that this was probably the nicest place they could qualify for, that they needed this as much as any tenant ever had. At the kitchen table, Elara spread out the lease agreement, her movements efficient and practiced. Standard terms, she explained, sliding the document toward them. Rent is due on the 1st of each month. Late fees apply after the 3rd. Maintenance requests go through our online portal. Any questions? Her tone was professional, flawless, the kind of courtesy you'd extend to anyone. Not warm. Not cold. Just appropriate. Dorian picked up the pen with a hand that trembled slightly. When the ink touched paper and his name began to form, Elara noticed his jaw clench. He was signing away his pride with every letter. When he finished, he slid the lease back to her. Their fingers didn't touch. She flipped to the signature page and signed her own name beside his. E. Voss. Owner. And just like that, the man who once owned her heart now rented her roof. The man who told her she'd never amount to anything now wrote checks to her every month. The irony sat in the room like a third presence, unacknowledged but undeniable. Lyra broke the silence with questions about parking and trash collection, normal things that normal people ask about normal apartments. Elara answered each one patiently, professionally. When the paperwork was complete, she handed them 2 sets of keys. Welcome to your new home, she said. If you need anything, don't hesitate to reach out through the proper channels. She emphasized those last 3 words just slightly, establishing the boundary. This was business. Nothing more. They left with promises to move in by the weekend. When the door closed behind them, Elara stood in the empty apartment, surrounded by the silence they'd left behind, and released a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Days passed. Then weeks. Life inside that apartment wasn't what Dorian and Lyra had imagined. The shine that once surrounded their relationship, the excitement of the forbidden, started to dull under the weight of unpaid bills and quiet arguments. Reality has a way of catching up to people who built their foundation on someone else's destruction. Dorian called her office once, his voice carefully neutral. "Hey, the kitchen sink is leaking. Water pools every time we use it." Elara was in a meeting when the call came through. She called him back during her lunch break. "Hi, Mr. Kellen. I got your message about the sink. Please submit a maintenance request through our online portal. We'll have someone out within 48 hours. "Oh, yeah, sure. I just thought since you and I, the portal works best for documentation purposes. Was there anything else?" Click. Every interaction went like that. Professional. Distant. Each email signed, "Regards, Voss Estates Management." Each communication filtered through proper channels. The more professional she became, the smaller he seemed to feel. She could see it in the way he avoided eye contact when they passed in the building, in how his shoulders hunched when he handed her the rent check in person that one time when the online system was down. He'd become invisible in his own humiliation, and she'd become untouchable in her success. One evening, about 3 months into the lease, Lyra's voice echoed through the thin walls. Elara was there to check on a different unit when she heard it. "I didn't marry you to live like this, Dorian. I didn't sign up for this." A door slammed. Footsteps down the stairs. Then silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. Elara didn't move, didn't intrude. She just stood in the hallway, hearing the echo of an argument that sounded familiar because all failing relationships sound the same eventually. Later that night, Dorian sat alone at his kitchen table, a late payment notice glowing on his phone screen. Credit cards maxed. Collections calling. The kind of financial stress that cracks even the strongest foundations. In the corner, the lease binder sat on the counter, and on its spine was a label that read, "Property of Elara Voss, Voss Estates, LLC." He stared at that name until the letters blurred together, remembering when it used to be preceded by, "I love you." Remembering when he was the one who walked away. Outside, Elara drove past the building on her way home from dinner with friends. She glanced up at the window and saw him through the glass, alone, hunched over the table, fixing something that kept breaking. She didn't smile. Didn't feel satisfaction or vindication. She simply nodded once to the night, to herself, to the universe that had brought them full circle. He'd told her she'd be fine without him. And she was. More than fine. She was free. Months passed. The silence between Dorian and Lyra grew thicker than the walls that contained it. Credit cards maxed out one by one. Calls from collectors became routine. Small fights about money escalated into bigger fights about everything else, about choices made and promises broken. Every new month brought another rent reminder from Voss Estates, and with it, another reminder of how far Dorian had fallen. He used to be the man with the corner office, the one who told Elara she dreamed too small, that she should be more ambitious. Now he was arguing with his wife over whether they could afford to order takeout. Now he was checking price tags at the grocery store. Now he was the one dreaming small just to survive. It's strange how quickly pride can evaporate under the heat of consequence. He called again one Tuesday evening. The water heater had stopped working. No hot water for showers. He needed it fixed immediately. Elara's voice stayed calm on the other end of the line, maddeningly composed. "I understand, Mr. Kellen. Please fill out the maintenance request online. We prioritize emergency repairs and will have someone there as soon as possible." "Elara, come on. Can't you just send someone now? It's freezing, and Lyra is the online portal, Dorian. That's how we track all requests." Click. The same voice that once begged him to stay, that once broke while asking him why she wasn't enough, now spoke to him like he was anyone. Like he was no one. The next morning, an envelope appeared under his door. He picked it up with dread already settling in his stomach. Late payment notice. Third one this year. He crumpled it in his fist, then unfolded it again, smoothing out the creases because destroying it wouldn't make it less real. That evening, Lyra stood in the doorway of their bedroom with a packed suitcase. Her eyes were red but dry, like she'd already cried all the tears she had. "I can't do this anymore," she said. "Not angry. Just tired. We can figure it out. I'll pick up more hours, It's not about the money, Dorian. It's about who you've become. Who we've become." He wanted to argue, to convince her, but the words wouldn't come. Because deep down, he knew she was right. They'd built their relationship on stolen moments and the excitement of something forbidden. And now that it was ordinary, now that it was real life with bills and responsibilities, there was nothing left to hold them together. She walked to the door, paused with her hand on the knob, and said quietly, "I hope you find what you're looking for." Then she left. The door closed with a soft click that sounded too familiar. He'd heard that sound before, 7 years ago, when he'd been the one walking away. The man who once walked away from love now watched it leave him behind. And this time, he understood what it felt like to be the one left sitting in the silence. Elara didn't celebrate. She wasn't that person, never had been. Revenge had never been the goal. Growth was. She was busy signing papers for a new property acquisition, a small apartment complex on the west side that needed work but had potential. She sat in conference rooms with lawyers and bankers, shaking hands, negotiating terms, building something bigger than any one person's approval or disapproval. Peace had replaced passion. Discipline had replaced doubt. She'd learned that the opposite of heartbreak isn't vindication. It's indifference. It's getting to a place where someone who once defined your entire world becomes just a name on a lease agreement. Still, one night, curiosity made her drive past the building where Dorian lived. Not because she wanted to see him, but because she wanted to see if she still felt anything. She parked across the street and looked up at the window. The light was on. She could see him moving around inside, alone now, head bowed, fiddling with something that looked like it was broken. A lamp, maybe. Something that wouldn't stay fixed. She sat there for a moment, watching this man who used to feel larger than life now reduced to a shadow in a rented apartment. She whispered to herself, so quietly no one else could hear, "Some lights aren't meant to stay on." Then she drove away, her heart steady, her mind clear. Weeks later, he appeared at her office door. She was reviewing blueprints for a renovation project when Maya knocked and said someone was asking to see her. When she looked up, there he was. Dorian. Looking older somehow, like the last few months had aged him years. His eyes looked smaller, dimmer, like something essential had been drained out of them. "Elara," he said quietly, standing in her doorway like he wasn't sure he was allowed to be there. "Can I talk to you? Just for a minute." She gestured to the chair across from her desk, the kind of gesture you'd make to any visitor. Professional courtesy. He sat down slowly, carefully, like he was afraid of taking up too much space. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry." She folded her hands on the desk, her expression neutral. "For the rent, or for the past?" He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. "For everything. For how I treated you. For what I said. For making you feel like you weren't enough when the truth is I was the one who wasn't." He looked down at his hands. "You were gold, Elara. Real gold. And I chased glitter. I chased something shiny and meaningless, and I lost something valuable." She studied him for a long moment. The man who once felt larger than life, who walked through the world with such confidence it bordered on arrogance, now sat before her reduced to a whisper. She could have said many things in that moment. She could have been cruel. She could have listed every way he'd hurt her, every night she'd cried because of him, every doubt he'd planted in her mind about her own worth. But cruelty would have meant he still had power over her. And he didn't. Not anymore. You didn't ruin me, Dorian, she said softly, her voice steady and sure. You set me free. He looked up at her, tears gathering in his eyes but never quite falling, like even his grief had nowhere to go. I know that doesn't make it better. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. You're right. You don't. But I'm not withholding it to punish you. I'm just not giving it to you because I don't need to anymore. Forgiveness isn't for you. It's for me. And I gave that to myself a long time ago. She stood up, a clear signal that the conversation was over. She walked to the door and opened it, holding it there. Take care of yourself, Dorian. It was the same thing you'd say to someone you used to know, someone who was once important but now was just part of your history. He stood slowly, nodded once, and walked toward the door. As he passed her, he paused. Thank you. For the apartment. For giving me a chance when I didn't deserve it. For teaching me what strength actually looks like. She didn't respond. Just gave him a small, polite smile. The kind you'd give a stranger. He walked out, and the door closed gently behind him. Not slammed. Not thrown shut. Just closed. The way chapters end when the story is over. That night, Elara realized something profound. Closure doesn't always come from an apology. Sometimes it comes from seeing the lesson standing right in front of you and recognizing that the person who hurt you is just another human being who made mistakes they'll have to live with. Sometimes it comes from the moment you realize their story is no longer connected to yours. That their choices, their consequences, their regrets have nothing to do with the life you've built. Dorian moved out the next month. The lease wasn't up, but he paid the early termination fee and left quietly, taking only what he'd brought. No drama. No scene. Just a forwarding address form filled out in his messy handwriting and a final envelope slipped under her office door. Inside was a short note on plain white paper. Thank you for giving me a roof when I had nowhere else to go. I hope you find all the happiness I couldn't give. She read it once, smiled slightly, and filed it away in a folder marked Closed Accounts. Not as proof of victory, but as evidence of growth. As a reminder that pain can end gracefully if you let it. That you can acknowledge someone's humanity without letting them back into your heart. A year later, the world looked completely different. Elara no longer measured her worth in who stayed or who left. She measured it in peace, in the quiet mornings when she woke up without anxiety, in the laughter that came easily now, in the knowledge that her happiness didn't depend on anyone else's promises. She'd become a guest speaker at real estate investment seminars, sharing her story about how she turned heartbreak into equity, pain into purpose. She stood on stages in front of hundreds of people and talked about resilience, about rebuilding, about the power of betting on yourself when no one else will. Before each talk, she'd take a deep breath and remember the woman who once cried on a kitchen floor wondering how she'd survive the next day. And she'd thank that woman for not giving up. At one event in downtown Chicago, standing under bright lights with an audience that hung on her every word, she said something that would be quoted in articles and shared across social media for months afterward. Sometimes the walls that collapse around us are just making space for the life we were meant to build. Sometimes the people who leave us are just clearing the path for us to find ourselves. The audience rose to their feet. Applause echoed through the hall like thunder, like validation, like proof that her story mattered. Outside afterward, she walked through the city streets, coffee in one hand, phone in the other, unhurried and unbothered. The same street she used to walk with Dorian felt different now. Lighter. Her phone buzzed with a notification. Another property closing confirmed. Building number 9. She smiled, whispered a small prayer of gratitude to God, and kept walking. Later that afternoon, she stopped by one of her properties, the duplex where it all began. She stood on the porch she'd built with her own hands, running her fingers along the railing she'd sanded and stained 7 years ago. The paint was holding up well. The foundation was solid. Just like her. Her phone rang. Maya's name lit up the screen. "Hey, boss." We just got a new application for the Lincoln Park unit. The one Dorian used to rent. Elara smiled, looking out at the street where autumn leaves danced in the late afternoon light. Send me the details. Let's find someone who'll make it a real home this time. She hung up and took one last look at the duplex, at this place where her second life had begun, where she'd learned that the foundation of your world should never rest on someone else's shoulders, that the only person who needed to believe in you was you. As she walked to her car, Elara thought about the journey, about the girl who'd sat on a rooftop 7 years ago, believing that being chosen by someone meant she had value, about the woman who'd cried on a kitchen floor, thinking her world had ended, about the version of herself who'd stood in front of that mirror at sunrise and made a promise to rebuild. All of them had led to this moment, to this peace. She drove through the city as the sun began to set, painting the buildings gold and amber. She thought about Dorian sometimes, but not with pain anymore, not with anger, just with the quiet acknowledgement that some people enter your life as teachers, even if the lesson hurts. He'd taught her that she was stronger than she knew, that she could survive losing someone who felt like everything, that the person she'd been searching for all along was herself. She wondered where he was now, what he was doing, if he'd found peace too. She hoped he had, not because she owed him anything, but because holding on to bitterness would have been like drinking poison and expecting him to suffer. She'd learned that the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's healing. It's becoming so whole, so complete, so genuinely happy that the person who hurt you becomes irrelevant to your joy. That night, in her brownstone with the exposed brick and floor-to-ceiling windows, Elara poured herself a glass of wine and stood by the window overlooking the city. The same city where she'd once felt so small, so lost, so broken. Now it stretched before her like a kingdom she'd claimed not through conquest, but through perseverance. Through the decision to keep building, even when everything inside her wanted to give up. She raised her glass to the skyline, to the woman in the reflection who'd fought her way back to life. Here's to closed doors, she whispered, and to the keys that open new ones. Somewhere across the city, Dorian Kellen sat in a modest studio apartment, looking at an old photo on his phone. A picture of him and Elara from 7 years ago, both of them laughing at something long forgotten. He'd kept it all this time, hidden in a folder he rarely opened but couldn't bring himself to delete. He thought about the conversation in her office, about her words that had haunted him ever since. You didn't ruin me. You set me free. He understood now what he'd lost. Not just a relationship, but a person who'd loved him when he was nobody special, who'd believed in him before the promotions and titles, who'd seen value in him that had nothing to do with status or success. He'd traded authenticity for excitement, substance for sparkle, and he'd spent years paying the price. He hoped she was happy. He genuinely did. Because in losing her, he'd learned what love actually meant. And the cruel irony was that he'd only learned it after she was gone. He deleted the photo, finally. Not out of bitterness, but out of acceptance. Some chapters need to close completely before new ones can begin. 5 years after that conversation in her office, Elara Voss stood on a different stage. This time, it was a TED Talk. The red dot glowed beside the camera, and thousands of people filled the auditorium, with millions more watching online. 10 years ago, she began, her voice clear and strong, someone I loved told me I'd never make it on my own. And I believed him. Not because he was right, but because I'd forgotten how to believe in myself. Today, I own 15 properties across 3 states. I run a consulting firm that's helped over 300 women build financial independence through real estate. And I sleep peacefully at night in a home I designed and built myself. She paused, letting the words settle. But this isn't a story about real estate. It's a story about reconstruction. About the moment you realize that the person who broke you actually gave you the greatest gift. They showed you who you are when everything falls apart. They showed you that you're not fragile. You're not incomplete. You're not less than. You're just getting started. The audience was silent, hanging on every word. Sometimes the universe doesn't give you closure. It gives you keys. Keys to doors you didn't even know existed. Keys to versions of yourself you'd never have discovered if everything hadn't fallen apart first. And if you're brave enough to keep walking through those doors, even when you're terrified, even when you're alone, even when everyone says you can't, you'll find that the life waiting on the other side is bigger and better than anything you lost. The standing ovation lasted 3 minutes, but Elara barely heard it. Because in that moment, she was thinking about the woman she used to be. The one who'd stood in a parking garage staring at a lipstick-stained coffee cup, feeling her world collapse. If she could go back and tell that woman anything, it would be this: the pain you're feeling right now is building something bigger than you can imagine. Trust it. Trust yourself. You're going to be okay. Better than okay. You're going to be extraordinary. And she was. What would you have done if you were Elara? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your stories inspire more people than you know. If this story moved you, tap the like button. And if you're new here, remember to subscribe so you never miss the next powerful true story from LifeBuzz Stories. Thank you for watching. And remember, every ending has an echo.